Good evening, everyone, and welcome. It's indeed a privilege to be here. And what a beautiful space we get to be in tonight, right? You know, it wasn't that long ago when the idea of holding a psychedelics event at a science museum would have been thought of something out of the fantasy fringe. But, you know, times have changed, and I really want to thank the Museum of Science and the Mahindra Center at Harvard for taking this big leap. So psychedelics have been part of our human story for quite a long time, bending our minds and our perception of reality along the way. They've been the sacred technologies of indigenous peoples and ancient empires for centuries. They've been the fuel for countercultures that were sparked right here in Boston and at Harvard University. And they've been the targets of the war on drugs and of deep cultural stigma. But psychedelics also holds a profound promise of healing and personal transformation, including from addiction and the wounds of war. And that promise has ignited a psychedelic renaissance through a resurgence of scientific research, through a push for drug policy reform, and through a burgeoning psychedelic wellness industry. But there's also perils to navigate along the way, such as the safety risks of psychedelics use and thorny questions about who gets access and who really benefits and who is harmed from the commercialization. So tonight we're focusing on Ibogaine, a substance that has come front and center in the psychedelics renaissance. And just to kick things off, we're going to take a peek at a trailer for a recently released documentary, which is about a group of veterans of the Special Forces and their journey with Ibogaine. And just to note that this video contains graphic content, some gunfire, and some explosions. Take a look.
At first, I was just wondering, when is this going to start?
The medicine brings out things it wants you to see, and you don't know why.
I had a lot of stuff to work through.
Navy SEAL training is one of the most demanding things on the planet.
It was like being drafted and going to the Patriots. It was everything I ever wanted.
The worse the place was, the more we wanted to go.
It felt like Russian roulette. Every time he would leave, he may not come home.
Everything that could have gone wrong went wrong.
We got discovered.
I can't fire back because I can't see anybody.
I thought my arm was gone, and I can't feel anything.
Blood and bullets spewed all over that thing. Just...
You go overseas and you see half your platoon get killed. We're not supposed to leave them.
I was just begging. Can you please help him?
The TBI and with the memory loss, I'd meet someone, I don't know what your name is, no idea.
He was doing all the things he was told to do, and he was actually getting worse. I got his medical records. I completely changed my approach. Psychedelic medicines proved to be effective, but both are illegal in the United States. So Marcus would have to travel to Mexico.
If you love your wife, you'll go to Mexico and do psychedelics.
All the body armor you put on, that all goes away.
My brothers, my teammates, you deserve to be happy and live a good life.
This is just one of those points in medicine where I've got to have the courage to jump.
That medicine takes you right to the crest and you fall off.
You get into this line of work because we feel like it's who we are. Who the hell am I now?
Let's meet our panelists. All right, I'm going to start on the far end with Bryan Hubbard. Bryan is the CEO of the nonprofit Americans for Ibogaine. and its co-founder along with former governor of Texas, Rick Perry. He is an attorney and has held leadership roles in state agencies and policy councils focused on health justice, disability, mental health, and opioid crisis and recovery. Amber Capone is the CEO of Veterans Exploring Treatment Solutions, or VETS, and its co-founder along with her husband, Marcus. Amber is a national leader in advancing veterans' mental health and suicide reduction through psychedelic therapies. Next is Jonathan Dickinson. Jonathan is the co-founder and CEO of Ambio Life Sciences, the largest provider of Ibogaine therapies. A psychologist and Ibogaine expert, he leads Ambio's strategy, research, and sustainability efforts and has published widely on safety, ethics, and Ibogaine's therapeutic and cultural impact. And then we have Yann Guignon. Yann is the founder of Blessings of the Forest, a cultural and natural heritage conservation nonprofit based in the UK and the African country of Gabon. He is also the appointed intercultural coordinator of Mahanga Manzambe, which is a council of Gabonese traditional leaders promoting the stewardship of Gabonese spiritual traditions called Bwiti and its sacred medicine. So welcome, everyone. You all represent very distinctive organizations working on the psychedelic Ibogaine. I'd like each of you to briefly describe your organization's mission and choose perhaps one example of an impact you're making that you're most proud of. Yann, let's start with you. And Yann is working with an interpreter tonight, so thank you for that.
Thanks. I think the most proud thing I am with, okay. Yeah.
And your mission.
I think to have been able to introduce the question of reciprocity towards Gabonese people in the West. Yeah, I think that's the main thing I'm proud of. Yeah.
So reciprocity over the use of the plant source.
Yeah, to aware people about, like, let's say, the consequences of this interest on the Gabonese side, and that Gabonese people wanted to be part of the discussion. So, I mean, that's what I started to do with the West in 2004, so 22 years ago. So yes, and now we are here, and so it's good, yeah.
So Ambio's mission is to ignite agency and inspire living. And I think this idea of agency kind of came out of us reflecting on what is maybe common ground that's shared between all of the different sort of spheres of people that we work with. Like, we have experience using Ibogaine to help people come off of opiates and other drugs. And then now we've had this opportunity to work with the special operations community, who are a very different set of circumstances in their lives that they're working with. And I think what's common to everybody is that I think Ibogaine gives people the opportunity to rediscover where they have choice, where I think, like, with addiction and with other kinds of pattern behavior that we deal with, it kind of feels like choice has been taken away from us. And so being able to recover some sense of agency, I think, gives people the opportunity to build on and grow and sort of rediscover hope. And I think that's what we're most proud of.
The mission of VETS is to end veteran suicide and, of course, reduce suffering. This mission was born out of my own family's experience with confronting the real terror and horror of suicide. And when Ibogaine was effective for my husband Marcus, who you saw in the documentary clip, we felt very compelled to pay it forward to others in our community who we knew were suffering as well. And never in a million years did we think that VETS would become what it has become, because in essence we are 3 organizations in one, providing triage support to veterans and their families today, while also adding to the growing body of data through our partnerships and collaborations with universities like Stanford, Ohio State, Johns Hopkins, Columbia, et cetera, UCSF. And then pairing the really credible voices from our programs alongside the really incredible data that we're collecting and advocating for state and federal policy change. So I'm proud of many things at VETS, but probably most proud of being a conduit to giving someone their life back, giving them hope back, giving children their parents back, their spouses back, and giving people an opportunity to be excited to actually live.
Americans for Ibogaine is the premier by virtue of being the only public policy and advocacy organization within the United States which has as its mission the expedited medicalization of Ibogaine as a breakthrough therapeutic for addiction and trauma within the U.S. medical system. The origins of Americans for Ibogaine goes back to my leadership as the inaugural chairman of the Kentucky Opioid Commission, which had as its job the distribution of almost $1 billion in settlement funds for opioid manufacturers and distributors for their role in unleashing the opioid epidemic right from the eastern part of my state. At that time, it was proposed that $42 million of Kentucky's settlement funds be taken to create a public-private partnership to drive Ibogaine through the FDA's drug development process as that breakthrough therapeutic. By virtue of the allies that were brought in by Amber and Marcus and their VETS organization, we had a tremendously successful campaign which persuaded a majority of that commission to get behind this endeavor. Unfortunately, political interference in the state of Kentucky killed that project. And 8 months later, after a very difficult sojourn, through a connection broker between Governor Perry and myself and Amber, we started out on what was a 10-month intensive odyssey in the state of Texas, which has now allocated $50 million to complete the job that was begun in Kentucky in what is the single largest public investment in psychedelic research and medical development in all history, and the first time an individual state has directly appropriated general revenue to drug development to address multiple concurrent public health crises within its borders which are representative of the national reality. With the successful signature of that bill by Governor Abbott on June the 9th, VETS is partnering with Americans for Ibogaine to shepherd now a dozen states that currently have either introduced or are about to introduce legislation to join Texas in what we consider to be the moonshot of our time, which is the medicalization of Ibogaine in the United States. Americans for Ibogaine and its partner organizations such as VETS are leading that charge.
The moonshot of our time. Folks, you can see we're in the midst of a pretty accomplished group of people here. So thank you. Amber, when your husband Marcus came home from war and multiple tours with the U.S. Special Forces, you saw a broken man in front of you that you barely recognized. This propelled you both on a new mission to transform suffering into psychedelics advocacy. So how did you convince other broken veterans of the Special Forces to start experimenting with substances that our federal government considers as classified as illegal and considers having no medical value whatsoever?
Oh, how much time do we have? Well, I'll say this. I personally never believed that Marcus was suffering solely from PTSD. The signature injury of the global war on terror is traumatic brain injury. He was being asked all the right questions, but there was no follow-up, no treatment, no diagnosis, and no cure for what he was grappling with. Marcus played football for 15 years, and he was a breacher for 13 years. And so I was never solely concerned about a psychological diagnosis because he was very eager to deploy time and time again. I was concerned about his cognition and neurological capabilities. And so when we found Ibogaine, I didn't really know the relief that it would provide, but what I saw on the back end felt semi-miraculous. I witnessed the return of his neurocognitive functioning, and I reached out to absolutely everyone that I thought would care. I closely followed the work of your fellow Bostonian, if I'm saying that correctly, Dr. Ann McKee, who was autopsying brains of football players with CTE. And a lot of the symptoms seemed to overlap. And so finally, I was able to convince a researcher, Dr. Nolan Williams at Stanford University, to take me seriously and to consider that maybe Ibogaine was doing something on a physiological level that we didn't understand. We were seeing it time and time again, and the Stanford study was born and completed within 9 months. 30 individuals took part in that study, and while their symptomatic scores dramatically improved, the effect sizes were 86 to 93% improvement in the areas of PTSD, depression, and anxiety. Their executive function also returned, and their cognition improved significantly. So much so that at one point, Nolan reviewed the data preliminarily and said, this can't be accurate. Recode everything, put it through again, show me in 2 weeks. And the data came back exactly the same. As word began to spread in our community that something was having this kind of effect, it was very easy to convince others to give it a try because they were being largely misdiagnosed and the treatments were failing them.
So when nothing's working, you take that leap. Just for context, I do want to, if you can see this, just a little bit of data. This is a science museum, folks, so here's some data from the U.S. Veterans Administration that actually shows that, quite strikingly, that trend of veteran suicide growing over time and the significant role that veterans, the role that TBI, traumatic brain injury, that Amber mentioned, plays in that. And some of these figures are quite staggering in terms of the impact. So let's talk a little bit about Ibogaine itself. So I want to put up a map of kind of the prominent psychedelics that includes Ibogaine and its plant source, Iboga. Now, compared to substances like LSD and magic mushrooms, Ibogaine is far less known to the American public. But in the research world, Ibogaine is being called the Mount Everest of psychedelics. So Jonathan, help us unpack what that means. What is Ibogaine, and what sets it apart from other psychedelics in terms of its subjective effects and how it works?
Sure. So I think Ibogaine is similar in some ways to other psychedelics, but in other ways it's going to be like almost opaque to the point where we don't really understand how it works. Like where we're starting to have a sense of what's going on with LSD and psilocybin affecting a very narrow band of sort of serotonin receptors in the brain. Ibogaine plays all over the map. There's a researcher at Columbia University who calls it like this matrix pharmacology. It's almost like it goes into the nervous system and sort of combs through everything at once. It doesn't have a strong affinity for any one particular mechanism, but it's sort of doing all of these things in unison, in concert with each other at the same time. And so it's very difficult to kind of understand exactly what the mechanisms of healing are, other than maybe this complexity is part of it. Maybe that's how it's able to both address some of the underlying physiological issues that, for example, veterans are dealing with, or people who are detoxing off of opiates are dealing with, as well as some of the psychological and cognitive aspects of it as well. So I think while psychedelics in general can occasion this beautiful sort of psychological journey, I think we still have a lot more to unpack about what Ibogaine is actually doing. And I think it's gonna, if we follow that thread, it can teach us a lot more about how the brain works, how the body works, and how to look for other medicines that might be also able to achieve some similar kind of healing.
So Bryan, I'm gonna ask you, what is it like to take Ibogaine? I mean, how do you take Ibogaine, and what is it like to take it? And we can have others chime in too.
This gentleman can probably speak it as well as I can because he was the first one to provide it to me. It's administered in pill form. There are certain common realities to everybody that goes with the Ibogaine experience, but the beautiful thing is it's highly individualized. From a physiological perspective, you're going to be in a state of semi-paralysis or ataxia for about 10 to 12 hours, or at least I was. You're always going to be fully and completely engaged with your faculties. My first psychedelic experiences were around psilocybin, and depending on what altitude you want to go to, it's going to fly you to the destination it chooses, not necessarily where you're going or want to go. Ibogaine is a respecter of free will. You will always be oriented to person, place, and time. And if I were on it, I'd have to lay on a mat, but I could, with some assistance, raise up and have this very conversation with you, maybe a little bit more trembly. But when you lay down, if you be quiet and you be still, it's going to show you things. And I can remember the first time that I went, had a coach by the name of Rene Perez. And I was president of the Teenage Republicans in high school and the College Republicans in college. I grew up with pictures of Ronald Reagan in my bedroom. So when I say things like, trust the plant because it is intelligent, and it may not give you what you want, but it's going to give you what you need. It is the fact. My wife and I went together. She had a storybook beautiful experience that was profound, very individualized to her personal history. I had a profound experience, but it was stark and it was harsh, but it was uniquely suited to me. So there are general realities, there are individual realities. It is intelligent. It is a respecter of your individuality and your free will, which in my mind is what makes it so divine.
So some of the studies on Ibogaine have shown that subjectively there are experiences that range from reliving or reviewing traumatic memories to mystical experiences to empathic connection. But there's also another observation about neurological repair and even the experience of the rewiring of the brain. So Jonathan, could you expand a bit on that aspect as well?
Sure. So again, I think there's still some mystery about exactly what it's doing. So I think we can probably pull some clues from the subjective effects. And I don't know if anybody here has any experience with psilocybin or LSD or something like that, but it can kind of feel at times like the environment around us is sort of lit up or saturated with movement and life or breath, and the things that we feel internally also, like our thoughts and our feelings, they also feel like they can be sort of saturated with meaning, and almost at times we have to renegotiate that boundary between what's inside of us and what's outside of us, leading us to feel like connected with the things around us. With Ibogaine, to some degree, it's almost the opposite. I think it really puts us in a more kind of dualistic mode where we can be very much aware of who we are. We can be very sort of familiar to ourselves in our inner dialogue and our thought process, but there's something else that sort of approaches us and wants to, like Bryan described, like show us things, and to the point where a lot of people talk about being in this kind of dialogue. And so when we're coaching people to go into the experience, it's preparing questions and trying to almost stimulate this dialogue, because there's ways we can kind of explore with that. But that feeling of being in interaction with something else, although it's some part of ourselves as well, is very distinct, I think, and very amplified with Ibogaine. So there's a researcher from Princeton University, Julian Jaynes, who had this theory about our ancestors actually not perceiving and reasoning the same way that we do. That the consciousness was not always necessarily so centered in the prefrontal cortex and the same type of decision making, that actually in the past, if we look at clues from literature and mythology, there was a lot of people who would describe sort of hearing a voice and then responding to that voice, especially in moments of like novelty or pressure or stress when we had to work through something, sort of a voice emerging and providing some sort of a resolution. And so he called this the bicameral mind, that we were able to sort of identify with one aspect of ourselves, but there was another aspect of our mind that would almost appear like it was speaking to us and providing solutions. And so, I don't know, my thought is that Ibogaine sort of puts us in touch with maybe other forms of reasoning through problems, where our prefrontal cognition and our best attempts to solve things by looking forward and moving through the world are failing us. And so somehow it brings us deeper into other aspects of our subconscious where we can work through situations and problems. And I think you can see neurologically how it does that by breaking up sort of traditional structures in the brain. But again, we have a lot more to understand about how those systems are operating.
Thank you. So I want to also give a question to Yann. So scientists and industry folks tend to think about psychedelics primarily as chemical substances or even as market commodities. I think you would argue that they are far more than that. So can you describe the cultural and ecological roots of Ibogaine, its plant source, Iboga, and its relationship to the communities that you serve in Gabon?
Yeah, thank you for this question. You want to know the cultural place of Iboga in Gabon. So Iboga in Gabon is sacred, basically. They call Iboga the sacred root. So it's considered as the shortcut to reach God, basically. So it's an initiatic plant. It's not a recreational plant. It's taken originally it was taken by women. Then it was only taken by men. Now it's taken by mixed men and women. For men, Iboga, the initiation of Iboga is part of Bwiti, right? Bwiti, right? That is practiced by Bantu people, originally by Pygmy people, Babongo people, that is a type of Pygmy people from Gabon, and also Bantu people who gave this tradition to Bantu people. So Iboga is part of a tradition called Bwiti. So Bwiti, it's the heart of unifying the communities, the people, but also the nature, and to unify the ancestors with you, to unify yourself. It's to know where you're coming from, to know your ancestors, to know what is your place in the community, to know the relation with the nature around you. So the initiation to Bwiti with Iboga, for men, it's the third initiation in the life of a man. The first initiation is circumcision for men. The second initiation is muiri, that is the kind of military services. And the third initiation is Bwiti. So they first do a kind of military, let's say, boot camp, to know their limits, to know about humility, before meeting Iboga, before meeting God, before knowing each other. This is mainly to prevent ego, I don't know what to say in English, ego inflation? Yeah, that's it. And also because after being initiated, you have quite a big energy about who you are, and it can make you a bit like I don't know what to say, but to high personality. So the community helps you to integrate what you receive, right? And not being in kind of messianic syndrome. You know? So it's a medicine to integrate first you in your environment, to integrate your place in the society, and to make the community united. So Iboga, it's also to precise the origin of the world. It's a Tsogo world. So Tsogo, it's one of the ethnic group from Gabon, and it comes from a Tsogo verb that is bogaga, and that means to heal. So Iboga means to heal. They don't care about if it's to heal the brain or if it's to heal this or it's to heal. That's it. So yes, that's a shortcut to to know yourself and to know about God and the universe.
And someone who is going through an initiation ritual with Iboga, the plant source of Ibogaine, what does that look like? How long does someone last in that ritual with the experience, and how does that compare to, say, in a therapeutic setting?
Okay, so it has been told to me by the elders that centuries ago, to be initiated to Iboga, it takes around a year to be initiated to Iboga. Yeah, because you first have to prepare your initiation, and there's a lot of stuff to do about cleansing, about finding all the tools that you need for the initiation, because Iboga is, let's say, one of the main tools in the initiation, but there's a lot of tools around. There's another plant medicine that we use with this medicine, before, during, and after. There is some tools that we use, like some special drums with some special skins. So before we used to go into the bush to hunt the precise animal, to get the precise skin, to make the drums. You need to have lots of musicians, dancers. So there's a lot of tools that are needed. So before the market, you have to go to the forest and finding all the tools and teaching you what about each tools before being initiated. So it was like centuries ago. Now it's usually it's about 3 weeks. So there's different steps. There's a protocol, of course. The first step is to acclimate you to the environment, you to be, you to be confident with the people around you. Then we make consultations with divination. We make confession also to know about your past, what you've done. So, and then we make cleansing, lots of cleansing inside, outside. And then we go through the initiation. It starts in the forest, and then it's in the temple. That's the basic stuff. Plus advices, lots of advices. Yeah.
So the thing I'm taking away, and perhaps others in the room are, that it's not just about taking Iboga as part of a ritual. It's part of a very broad complex of activities and steps that one has to embark on.
Yeah, I mean, we talk about initiation. Initiation comes from Latin word, initiare. That means to start, to receive some knowledge. So basically, the thing that when you start the relation with Iboga, you enter in a school that never stops. So the biggest job is not, taking the medicine is a big job, but the biggest job is to integrate the medicine. It's to integrate what the medicine teach you. That's the biggest job. Most of people in Gabon need, let's say, minimum a year to integrate the experience, to 10 years. I mean, me, I've been initiated like 22 years ago, and I'm still learning about what I've seen today, right?
Thank you. I think we want to talk now also about something that was raised before about the relationship of Ibogaine to the opioid crisis. I just put up some data for you to see that speaks to the magnitude of the opioid crisis in the United States that has grown over time and has contributed to a significant amount of deaths. These are data reported by the CDC. So I want to ask Bryan, for nearly half a century, Ibogaine has been known to science and to the psychedelic underground as a powerful interrupter of substance addiction. The American public is in the midst of this decades-long public health crisis, and that relates to opioid addiction and to overdose death. So, as a national leader in policy reform around opioid addiction and recovery, what stands out to you about Ibogaine compared to existing standards of care for opioid use disorder, and about the difference Ibogaine could make in this current crisis?
So some of y'all in this audience who are familiar with this issue and who are familiar with medicine and science generally will hear about the utilization of evidence-based best practices with which to address a problem. The current evidence-based best practice with which to address opioid dependency, and this is just concrete matter of fact, is what I call opioid maintenance treatment, manufactured by the opioid maintenance industry, which is the opioid industry. These are just the facts. Methadone, buprenorphine, which has the brand names of Suboxone, Sublocade, Subutex. They are vitally important parts of a recovery treatment infrastructure. They have saved thousands of lives. And the way in which they save lives is they provide satiation of that physiological need for the opioid by the dependent individual. They also contain, theoretically, in the case of buprenorphine, an antagonist, a blocker, whereby if you ingest the buprenorphine, anything else you ingest in excess of that is not going to make an impact, because you have the opioid agonist, which is attached to satiate the desire and forestall withdrawal, and you have the antagonist that blocks the effect of any additional opioid consumption, so you can't get high, theoretically. Now, you talk to people who've had buprenorphine treatment, and what I have described theoretically is not always how it works out practically. There are also risks that come with these treatments, one of which is their diversion has the capacity to create independent opioid use disorder among those who consume it for whom it is not prescribed. Hold on to that last fact. Ibogaine is singular in that, for reasons that are not known or understood, it has the capacity within 36 to 48 hours, in 80% of cases, with a single treatment, to completely and fully restore the brain's neurochemistry to the condition which prevailed before the person ever took the first opioid pill. What do I mean by that? Dopamine and serotonin are your survival chemicals. They drive your most baseline human behaviors, the instincts to fight, flight, eat, drink, procreate. Dopamine and serotonin. Now, this is a lawyer talking science, so the finer science minds out there may have more contour to this than I do. And I got D's in math and science. For years, I subscribed to the moral deficiency model, where the person addicted to pills had some, they didn't get spankings enough, they didn't get to Sunday school enough, and they were just morally reprobated individuals for whom there were no hope. I learned better. And what I learned was that opioid-dependent individuals who engage in what appears to be morally depraved criminality are actually suffering from a profound neurochemical brain injury, which is the inability to organically produce dopamine and serotonin absent the ever-escalating consumption of high doses of opioids. So essentially what Ibogaine does is it fixes that. And it restores the brain's dopamine and serotonin production up to its pre-opioid exposure levels within an accelerated time frame, a process that usually takes at least 18 months of complete abstinence to begin to occur in the brain organically, which is why abstinence-based white-knuckle programs have a 7% success rate. Now, theoretically, buprenorphine and methadone are clinically effective. The reality is that methadone has the highest rate of success as measured by treatment compliance and retention, and that's at about 24% after 6 months. Buprenorphine has a rate of 18% success at 6 months, and that's after you lose 50% of patients after 6 months. Just sticking with facts, and if we have time, we'll put some color on these facts. Kentucky has 4.8 million people. 1.6, no, let me say, 4.6 million people, 1.8 are on Medicaid. Between January 1 of 2017 and October 31st of 2023, Kentucky Medicaid had paid for over 110 million individual doses of buprenorphine and had been billed $1 billion by its manufacturer, a manufacturer by the name of Indivior, which has a federal felony conviction rap sheet behind its name, which required it as a condition of the plea to permanently disband its internal Suboxone sales force. I'm just going to leave it at that.
So there are also questions about risks of Ibogaine as well. So we're talking here in a very vulnerable population who's addicted to opioids. The curative properties, but there are also risks. So maybe Jonathan, I'll ask you to speak to some of the risks of Ibogaine use, even in therapeutic settings.
Sure. So when I first started to work with Ibogaine, it was late 2009, and at the time there was a handful of clinics in Mexico that had started to provide treatment, and that was about 10 years in after the FDA had sort of canceled the last trials. NIDA had stopped funding trials. There had been some work in the early 90s on Ibogaine. And when it all kind of collapsed, people who had experiences with Ibogaine, who had been coming off opiates with them and having radical transformations in their lives, some of them became care providers and started to sort of set up places for people to come and take Ibogaine. And eventually some of them set up in Mexico. So there's sort of this organic sort of ground up development of this clinical space had been happening, but it was also becoming more and more clear that there was several risk factors because there's a number of people that have died taking Ibogaine, and there's also people end up in the hospital for various reasons. So after some forensic work, they were able to establish that there was two sort of primary issues. One of them was pre-existing heart conditions. The other was drug interactions, right? And so I think when I got involved and started to organize in the community, we were able to pull together a lot of data. And in 2015, we published sort of clinical guidelines for Ibogaine-assisted detoxification. And I think there is sort of a general consensus amongst medical practitioners now that we can fairly accurately mitigate the cardiac risks with Ibogaine. Where there's still a lot of variables and a lot of difficulty is around drug interactions, especially when we're working with people who are doing street drugs. Because when people are testing positive for fentanyl, we don't actually know what molecule is in their system because there's many different synthetic fentanyl analogs. There's also routinely new, powerful synthetic opioids or tranquilizers that end up in the drug supply. There's xylazine and medetomidine are both powerful tranquilizers that are very quickly sort of get introduced to broad regions in the United States. Nitazines, and then there's other sort of new things we can't even really test for. So sometimes we don't even really know what we're working with, and so there's other issues at play when we're working with addiction as a public health issue that will need to be addressed. But I think Ibogaine, as Bryan has described, is a very powerful option. And I think it's a really important part of the suite of responses that need to happen to the public health concern.
So I want to also talk about, Amber, earlier you mentioned the studies that were done at Stanford with a group of Special Forces veterans, some kind of early clinical research. Just remind us again, what were some of those findings about the treatment with Ibogaine?
So there were 30 individuals that were enrolled in the study. It was 9 months start to finish, so it was a pretty quick succession. They had several trips to Stanford and then to Mexico, back to Stanford, et cetera. The fMRI data was included in this study, as well as a host of other measures. The effect sizes, again, were 86 to 93% across the main areas of suffering for veterans, PTSD, depression, anxiety, the cognition scores and executive functioning scores all improved significantly. Suicidality dropped from 47% to 7%, and the results held and actually improved as time went on. The first revisit to Stanford was at the 7-day mark, again at the 30-day mark, and then 6 months. The study ended at 1 year, and I believe everyone stayed enrolled in the study the entire time. Of the 30 participants, 29 reported some degree of suicidal ideation, and either 7 or 8 of them had suicide attempts in the past. I know these individuals because they came through our program. Many of them are spokespeople, ambassadors, friends to this day, and I can tell you that their lives have been absolutely radically transformed. Now, we had a little bit of a filming lull where the filmmaker said, you know, we don't have much filming going on, would Stanford mind if we did some taping there? Thank goodness they did, because it really adds such depth to the documentary to have these anecdotal stories that we've been hearing for years validated not only in the data, but on film, where you can see these individuals before and after. They're really like not even the same people.
And how generalizable are these findings? I know this is a small group, so what can we say about that? And are there plans to include a broader swath of the population? I know that we can say that even among the veterans population, among women, among ethnic and gender minorities, among older vets, there are high rates, a high burden of drug abuse, of suicidality. So what can we say about what is planned there?
I wish that I could say that there was a plan, but the lead researcher of that study died by suicide this past fall. And it was his life goal to do more research. And I think it underscores the fact that depression, trauma, suicidal ideation does not discriminate. And Jonathan may be able to speak to the study more, but I know one of the things that Nolan said before passing, he had become a dear friend to us, was that science had never seen outcomes like this. It was the most sophisticated molecule on the planet, and that it seemed to work as a heat-seeking missile in the brain in terms of going to the areas of deficit and creating improvement. He didn't fully understand it, but he was fully committed to studying it in his lifetime, and none of us thought that his life would be cut so short.
Tremendous loss for the research world and the psychedelics community too, yeah. So I want to kind of ask a sort of broad question. One of the conclusions of the Stanford studies, it was actually just published in a paper that came out last month, was that, and they said, Ibogaine treatment seems to compress years of conventional psychotherapy into a single session by facilitating profound emotional and spiritual insight and physical repair of the injured brain. So that's a lot to kind of take in one sentence, but it leads me to ask, is Ibogaine and other psychedelics, are they rewriting the way we define neuropsychiatric conditions and even how we think of healing more broadly? And I'm going to open it up to anyone who wants to jump on that.
I'd love to offer something. This is just my pure observation. Founding and shepherding vets over the last 8-9 years, I have seen a consistent reconnection in a myriad of ways. And I feel like, I've witnessed so many grant recipients through our program coming in feeling disconnected from everything, including themselves, and leaving with a connection, not only to themselves, but wanting to reestablish a connection to family, faith, friendships, nature, purpose, passion, just leaving Ambio after 5 short days feeling reconnected to life again. I don't know that that's really quantifiable, but I've seen it happen again and again and again.
Yeah, I do think that it's going to have to rewrite how we think about neuropsychiatric illness. I think one of the challenges that we have is that, like Amber was describing, there's not existing treatments for traumatic brain injury. So a lot of times people are just getting diagnosed with things that there are treatments for, like PTSD. And so there's a standard of care. And if you've been through traumatic experiences in the past, then you qualify, right? But even if you look in the diagnostic and statistic manual about how these disorders are defined, you're not supposed to diagnose if there is an underlying organic problem or if there's a substance use issue at play. You're supposed to prioritize that. And I think Ibogaine gives us the opportunity to sort of look at maybe it's not everybody who would be diagnosed with PTSD. Maybe it's not everybody who would be using opiates. But there was a study in, so I'm from Canada, and in the downtown east side of Vancouver, there's a lot of attention placed because it's sort of the highest concentration of people who use drugs and opiates in Canada. And so there was a study there where they looked at just sort of assessing anybody who might qualify with a traumatic brain injury, who was living on the streets and openly using drugs, and all of them qualified. And so it's not necessarily to say that the opiates were causing this, but that maybe there's underlying conditions that are being addressed. And it kind of goes further and further too, like when people are overdosing off of fentanyl, a lot of times what's happening is they're kind of stopping breathing for a while, and so you can have like hypoxia in the brain, and so people who live in this lifestyle are exposed to all kinds of opportunities for there to be organic damage as well, right? And so we all that we're doing with the psychiatric standard of care right now is diagnosing based on symptoms. And so we're just starting to get a little glimpse that there's maybe underlying conditions and possibly a way to treat them. I think we're right on that verge. And the work that's being done with vets and what Nolan accomplished at Stanford is that cusp.
Yann, I asked the question, I'll repeat it in a short version. Is Ibogaine helping us to rethink the way we define healing and certain brain conditions and psychiatric conditions? What would someone from the Bwiti tradition, who is the traditional source of Ibogaine in Iboga, how would they answer that question?
Wow. I've talked about this subject very recently with Master Mubeiwa, who is the elder director of this NGO Mahanga Manzambe that I represent internationally. So, I mean, their main wish is that the West will not do with Iboga what has been done with tobacco. Tobacco initially it's a sacred medicine, right? And it became something else now today. I mean, I don't know many people who smoke cigarettes knowing that it's a sacred plant that saves lives. It totally becomes the opposite. So the main wish is that the medicine is not corrupted, right? Also, I'm listening about studies down here, at the beginning, because the studies on Ibogaine starts more longer than what I've heard. I started in 2 centuries ago in the West. First in UK, then in France. Ibogaine has been isolated in 1901. So lots of studies have been done on rats and dogs, and then finally veterans and guys like that. But I mean, look, just something I want to explain. I mean, Gabon is a country who suffered a lot from slavery, right? And then who has been colonized and looted and occupied for centuries, right? And now there's something very surprising when you go to Gabon, is all those people are smiley, generous, welcoming with people, even if you're white, even if you're Chinese. They're very welcoming people, very generous. They laugh a lot, they dance. It's very joyful people. Those people should have been very traumatized by their past, right? And like other African countries are very tough with Westerners. In Gabon, not. So they should have a medicine somewhere, right, for them to be like. So there's a study to do on why Gabonese people are so wealthy, psychologically, with the past that they have. So it's a kind of PTSD, right, that has been treated on a scale of a nation, right? So that's the second thing. So they would like studies to be done also in Gabon in a way to understand all those people who work with the medicine because they take the medicine every weekend, right? And the third thing is they hope that in the future of the medicine, the nature will not be dissociating from the culture. It's like having a supercar, right? And you don't know how to ride it. You don't have the license to ride it. And there's some, in the culture, there's some, how to say, like magic tip, how do you say tip? True advices, yeah. Magic advices that help a lot to understand how this medicine is working. So maybe the science will make a good profit, I mean, in terms of timing and in terms of finances, to make a joint collaboration about studies, how to use this medicine, what is the impact of the medicine, how to aftercare of the medicine, because there is some key to translate into the Western medicine. So, I mean, now traditional medicine is now considered more in the world. So the hope is that traditional medicine and modern medicine work together and that both sides consider the science of the other one. I think that's the main wish, yeah.
Could be a groundbreaking, if not challenging, collaboration.
Yeah, it is.
But
yeah.
let's see. Certainly funding is needed for those kinds of endeavors. Brian, I'd like to kind of go back to what you mentioned right at the outset about the effort that Americans for Ibogaine has been leading in terms of building a collaboration, a consortium really of states who are looking at new legislation around Ibogaine for research. I'm going to put up a map, and I think this just gives a visual for people. And Brian, you got to forgive me, the things are moving so fast, it could be inaccurate, but really what this is saying is those colors, not the gray colors, but the other colors, give an idea of states that have either already moved to pass legislation around Ibogaine or in some sort of discussions. So one of the things that stands out too is that the number of states that represent politically and culturally conservative regions. And you know, so this groundswell of support in those states is interesting because those regions have historically not been cheerleading for psychedelics, let's say. So what's going on? Are we in the midst of a cultural shift?
We were just talking about this before the program began. There is I would describe it as a full circle cultural shift. So if we go back to the counterculture of the late 60s, and the conditions from which it arose and the response that it represented to those conditions. And psychedelics was a central feature in what was considered to be the pathway to enlightenment, to recognize the industrial scale war machine, to recognize the systems of dehumanization within the United States by what that time was the political left. 50 years or so later, the very things that I have described broadly, the systems of dehumanization, the individualized and at scale spiritual despair that is within the fabric of American society can be quantified by 1.5 million people who have died in this country over the past 5 years of drug overdose, alcohol-related disease, and suicide. The most visible symptom of profound spiritual despair that can be objectively, undeniably identified. A casualty figure that exceeds the total number of all U.S. soldiers killed in action since 1776. My first whiff of the pre-revolutionary conditions that exist in the United States was taking the Kentucky Opioid Commission across the state for 20 individualized town halls on Tuesday nights that would run from 6 o'clock in the evening until they was done. This was on the backside of COVID. And what began as a 15-minute technocratic presentation of this commission's bureaucratic job became an outpouring of communal cathartic grief right in front of us that as its sum total assertion, individually and in community, was, we don't think you have the competence or the honesty to do anything meaningful with this almost $1 billion that you've got to change a damn thing about our lives. In October, the Wall Street Journal published a broad-based poll covering all ends of the ideological spectrum. 80% of Americans believe the American dream is dead. The Pew Research Center published one this past week that shows that exactly 17% of the American people trust the federal government. The past 50 years of American life have seen the mass dissolution of family and community, and the past 30 years have seen the impunity of institutional criminality from on high. There has got to be, and there is, a recognition among folks who have historically been associated with the political right, the Nixon and Reagan voters who 30 years ago were arguing with the Roosevelt and Kennedy voters, that we have a foundational problem in this society. They may not be able to quite articulate what it is, but it all gets back to the central reality of dehumanization in the United States and our failure to recognize one another as inherently spiritual beings who are all kin and come from same source by whatever name you want to call that source. They know it. And that is the opportunity for the advancement of plant medicine that is very unique and special at this point in time. VETS has helped lay the foundation culturally as much as medically, with the war fighters who are red, white, and blue, Lee Greenwood through and through to that part of America, who are able to say, guess what? This most powerful psychedelic on earth saved my life. Jonathan Dickinson's doing it. Person by person down at Ambio in real time, producing the pollinator bees who are able to fly out into their families and into their communities to say, there was nothing that was going to save me, here it is. And oh, by the way, I'm a spiritual being, I know it. Yann Guignon serves a society that is the originator of this knowledge, and I've got to recognize our brother by choice, Mr. Stéphane Lasme, who is from Gabon, who has been along on this pathway all the way through with me and has been a wonderful educator. There is a universality to the Iboga experience that has the ability, if established as a medical beachhead, as a treatment for the most profound conditions of despair in American society, that can change our course. It took us 30 years to get here acutely, and I would argue even longer than that in terms of the root systems that's brought us where we are. It's going to take us at least that long to get out of it. There's not a human institution in this country that has the capability or the trust of individual people to do it. It's going to have to happen organically. And the best opportunity to give that to occur is through the advancement of the sacred wood. Praise the Lord.
Good night, everyone. No, thank you, Bryan. You're going to have to forgive me after such a rousing speech to dig into another political question, especially in the midst of in the middle of a science museum. But this is for Amber. So we're seeing an impressive movement among states who are lining up with legislation, considering legislation around Ibogaine. But the legal reform around psychedelics at the federal level has been a tougher nut to crack. And yet this administration, our current administration, seems to be the most favorable of all administrations of perhaps psychedelic reform. So can you tell us what's in play there? How has VETS been involved? And what can we expect about Ibogaine at the federal level?
I'll start out by saying that, as longtime members of the military community, I think, we might have transitioned back into the civilian world thinking that we were segmented in society. And I quickly realized that we are so much more alike than we are different. And if we really wanted to get something done, this had to be a bipartisan issue. And so the secret sauce of the team at VETS and the reason that we've been able to create such advancement in such a short amount of time is because we are very different. And yet we found a way to work together. We do work at the state level, but your question is about the federal level. And yeah, it is a very tough nut to crack, although I do think you're right about this particular administration. Although we would work with any administration, this is the most bipartisan purple issue of my lifetime. And it's showing up that way. Legislators are very open on both sides of the aisle, especially around veterans. Everyone tends to agree that those who are willing to die for our country or have served our country should receive access to effective care. I think that the federal work is happening much more rapidly than anyone thought possible. We're choosing to work through a coalition that VETS led the development of. The 4 founding members are VETS, Navy SEAL Foundation, Green Beret Foundation, and Wounded Warrior Project. And most recently, we have been joined by a home-based program right here in Boston. So I think when you have a conglomerate of highly respected, high-profile organizations that are coming together to unite one voice, lawmakers start to listen. In fact, the day we launched Valor on Capitol Hill, we had a meeting inside the VA, and Secretary Collins himself said, "I've been wanting one united voice. Bring me one united voice and we will get something done." So that's what we're aiming to do. It's just not going to happen overnight.
Absolutely. And just to put a finer point on it, for when we talk about federal policy reform, often at the front of the line there, we're talking about the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, creating a pathway for approving psychedelic drugs, and there are a number of candidates that are under consideration, as well as the Drug Enforcement Agency. That's sort of the other leg of the stool, is about legalization and rescheduling psychedelic substances. So these are the kinds of questions that come up. I'd like to kind of swing back to Yann and to talk about an issue where we're seeing such increasing demand in psychedelics, in Ibogaine specifically. The psychedelic industry is projected to be worth just over $10 billion by next year. That's a billion with a B, as in completely bonkers, I think. As scientific and public demand for psychedelics like Ibogaine increases, Indigenous and traditional communities across the world are sounding the alarm about biopiracy, which is the theft of unauthorized and commercial exploitation of natural resources and cultural heritage. So you've brought a special recorded video message about this directly from Gabon, which we're going to see and then talk about some more. So could you please introduce our virtual guest?
Yeah, Master Mubei decided to send a message to whom concerns, because for them to travel to United States is not so easy, right? Also to talk in English, to understand English is not so easy too. So that's why I'm carried a message. And basically, he wants to tell to people that Iboga is a plant of God that is dedicated to heal people. They are not against healing the world. They just ask for reciprocity. That's it, for fair trade and sustainable development. Because this work on Iboga for 2 centuries has caused some difficulties into the communities. I mean, Iboga is endangered into the wild. The price is rising. The quality is going low for traditions. So for traditional people, so it's just asking to have like to find a way to regulate that properly, to and also to have benefit sharing. Yeah.
Yes, and Master Mubay is the chairman of the association, the Traditional Council.
Mahagama Nzambe, yes.
Okay.
It's a national NGO dedicated to the preservation of Bwiti, right?
Yeah.
And traditional medicine. Yeah.
Okay, let's take a listen to that.
Ladies and gentlemen, in a cyclical fashion, I stand virtually before you today, not only as a representative of an African Gabonese NGO, the Association National Mahangama Nzambe, but also as a humble defender and spokesperson for an ancestral heritage. While the scientific world is finally rediscovering and recognizing some of Iboga's therapeutic potential, particularly for treating post-traumatic disorders and addictions, the roots of this plant and this wisdom are dramatically drying up here at home. We are not against research. We are not against worldwide access to this medicine. We are a very tolerant and generous community, respectful of the primary purpose of Iboga, which is to heal, regardless of ethnic, racial, or social origins. But we are against the post-colonial erasure and amnesia that wants to turn Iboga and its potential into an American or European discovery, ignoring the peoples who made it sacred at the genesis of their knowledge. I humbly ask recognition of Gabon as the original cradle of Iboga, the source of Ibogaine, and respect for the traditional and legitimate holders of the plant's therapeutic knowledge. The creation of legal, ethical, and sustainable channels for Iboga and its derivatives produced in Gabon, respecting both the environment and the cultural rights of the indigenous peoples, enabling them to benefit from the economic windfall generated by this medical revolution and to develop their community projects. A sincere partnership between the custodians of our traditional knowledge and the scientific community. The support of NGOs on the same virtuous model as Blessing of the Forest, which tirelessly supports our cause and to whom we have given a mandate to represent us before you today. Ladies and gentlemen, in your capacity as such, you seek to heal the wounds of your soldiers, the torments of the unreasoned hyperconsumption, and the psychosomatic illness of your compatriots. If Iboga is to save the world, then the world must save Iboga. Thank you very much.
So thank you to Master Mubaye for sending that message so many miles away. It definitely resonates closely, though. I want to just follow up on that and briefly before we kind of move toward our question and answer. Yann, you've partnered with Jonathan and his company Ambio and the Gabonese people to address some of these questions about sustainable use and reciprocity around Iboga. Could you talk about what this partnership is, how it works, and some of its kind of concrete accomplishments?
Yeah, basically, we are implementing the Nagoya Protocol in the Republic of Gabon.
And what is the Nagoya Protocol?
It's a protocol that is about bio, I don't know what to say in English, about genetic resources protection and cultural knowledge is associated to those genetic resources. And Gabon is the first country in the world who signed this protocol in 2011. So it's about protecting the origin of resource and also the knowledge associated to that. So we are implementing that protocol with Ambio since 2021, something like that. So basically, it's a pilot project about a clinic that we choose to work with, who is sensitive to the cause that we defend in Gabon, So first, it was about prior consent. How do you say? Prior consent. So the first
prior informed
prior
consent.
informed consent. Yeah, sorry. So the first thing it was for him to meet Gabon, to meet Gabonese people, to come to Gabon, then to ask them the permission to use the medicine and to explain them why he wants to use the medicine. So they gave him officially the permission. Then he met the authorities to also ask the authorities to use the medicine because in Gabon, Iboga belongs to the states and also to communities. So you have to ask to both sides, and then also to explain what you want to do, and to also to make a proposal about benefit sharing, about what would be the material benefit he can share with the communities, and the non-material things that he can share, like knowledges, like training. Like for example, today, was working with them about training some addiction doctors in Gabon, because there's now new problem in Africa, in Gabon, with addictions. There's new drugs that are coming. It's quite new. Well, suicide is quite rare, but it starts to arrive too. So there's clinics all around the world that work with addictions and post-traumatic disorders, and it's also good to have this kind of space in Gabon, because everybody is not into the Bwiti tradition. It's just 10% of the people. I mean, 80% of Christians now, so they don't go to initiation, but they want to stay linked to their medicine without the cultural aspect. So having a clinic in Gabon, it would be great with the same model. So we're working on the, how do you say, skill transfer between his clinic and Gabon. And program studies about the medicine studies, different programs.
So this is a mechanism, just to see if I understand, it's a mechanism based in international law that allows for setting up a relationship to share, to have access to resources with the permission of the traditional communities. And it allows for benefits from any kind of commercialization or to come back to the communities, and as well as other kinds of non-monetary benefits.
Exactly.
So, Jonathan, could you just follow up and say, like, how does that work? What sorts of tangible benefits have come back to communities? What are they experiencing from this relationship?
I think, so there's a couple of aspects of this. One is that it's access to actual genetic resources. So we've been able to export root bark from Gabon, turn it into medicine, and use it at the clinics in Mexico. And I think when we talk about benefits sharing, it's a little bit above and beyond what we normally talk about in regards to fair trade, which would be that we just paid a good price. Where benefits sharing means not only did we pay a decent price for the material, but some of the benefit that we were able to generate from its use, we also share back. So, practically that looks like there's a financial component to being able to share benefits, but it's like Yann also described, we're trying to understand ways where we can share some of the knowledges back to Gabon. And I think Nagoya is really a mechanism to try to understand, like, if we're going to build a business around this, like our fates are intertwined, and that we have to see this as we need to be able to invest with the communities and to understand what their needs are and how we can collaborate. So I think it's very much evolving, and this collaboration with the addiction center there is something that's only emerged this year. Like it's an emergent and long process that we're going to be invested in for a very long time.
How scalable is something like this with Ibogaine, or even in other areas of psychedelics, this kind of model, this kind of partnership model? How scalable?
I think we're at the point in Gabon. There was a moment when we first started to communicate, was like 2012, and there was a concern that Iboga was going to disappear from the public domain in Gabon because there wasn't a lot of agriculture around it. It was something that was harvested sort of from the wild for traditional use. And so I think it's really through Yann's work and sort of advocating for people to begin planting and to be able to think about at least sustaining their own needs, if not producing a surplus, that now I don't think that there's an issue with there not being enough iboga. There's almost too much iboga that's being planted, and we have to try to understand how can we somehow make use of this resource that Gabon is now producing to bring that into the drug supply that's going to be developed in the United States or elsewhere in the world, right? And so there's a lot of work to do there. Yeah, and I think. Yeah.
Thank you. And Bryan, I know you've also been in Gabon. You've had meetings with various stakeholders, including the government. I'd like to ask, what have you learned about what the vision is there among the Gabonese you've spoken to about Ibogaine innovation? And is that message getting to some of the lawmakers that you've been also working with here in the U.S.?
So the very first time I believe I was introduced to the issue of scarcity of Iboga within Gabon just came with the general education about the significance of Gabon as the origin country of this medicine. And I was introduced to Yann as well as David Nassim through Blessings of the Forest when I was overseeing this project in Kentucky. And Master Boyle testified by video in a hearing there, and Blessings of the Forest was platformed as witnesses in Kentucky to talk about the necessity of having true, genuine economic and cultural partnership. And this is a message that resonates with me simply because if we look at the nation of Gabon, you have what is essentially a very proud, dignified, materially perhaps not wealthy, but wealthy in wisdom, agricultural society that has a precious resource on that ground. Well, I know what that is, because in the mountains from which I come, there was a peasantry, there was a bunch of subsistence farmers, and underneath that ground was an invaluable amount of coal. And when it was discovered, industrial interests from right in around this part of the country come on down there, and they jerked it out. And they left poverty and death in the wake of it. And that's the people I come from. So, this mission about the need to treat Gabon with respect as a partner, government to government, and as brothers and sisters, people to people, is something that speaks to my heart. So, if Americans for Ibogaine and its partner organizations like VETS are going to responsibly steward the medicalization of Ibogaine into the United States, even if it is fully synthetically produced from a lab that never touches the first Gabonese plant, it is important to treat Gabon as a partner. So on January 6th, with the assistance of Mr. Lasme, who is the Michael Jordan of Gabon, we traveled to that country. Please stand up, Stefan, so everybody can see the Michael Jordan of Gabon, Mr. Stefan Lasme. With his kind and beneficial assistance, we traveled there, and he helped organize what was the first ever International Iboga Conference in Gabon. We had the opportunity to meet with government officials, which included the Minister of Water and Forest, who oversees the possession and distribution of that resource, the Minister of Culture and Youth Sports, the Director of the Agricultural Development Authority, as well as the First Lady of Gabon, whose personal passion project is the creation of an Iboga treatment center for teenagers in Gabon who, as they have said, are addicted to drugs. Now, I was very candid about something, as I have been with these two gentlemen. The United States is not a signatory to the Nagoya Protocol. It's an international treaty that was negotiated under the auspices of the UN. And the U.S. may never be a signatory to that document. That does not nullify our obligation to treat Gabon as a partner, because if we medicalize here in the United States, that is going to be the beginning of what will be the creation of a global economy for Iboga-driven medicine, precisely because of its immense sophistication. So we are here at a point in history where we are setting the mold in all the ways in which we are working individually and complementary to make this a medical reality, to make it a revolution in neuropharmacology and the biology of the brain, and to do so in a fashion that makes sure that the originators of this resource and all of the ancient wisdom that they possess are partners in full in the exchange of benefits, in the receipt of advanced Western scientific knowledge, and in what I thought was the most joyful expression when I was in Gabon, which was finally. There are some white American people coming over here to actually acknowledge that this is incredibly sophisticated and comes from God. We've known this all along. Thank you. Thank you for just acknowledging what we have had all these years. And that was really profound. Thank you, Stefan.
Thank you. Folks, I think it's time for me to stop talking and hear from you all with some Q&A. So I want to invite, we have the Slido, and you can scan on your phone or in your program. If you have a question you want to add there, you perhaps already have added it. And you also have an opportunity to come to a microphone and just give your question live. So if you feel like you want to come to the mic, please do. And while you come lining up, I'm going to just start off with one question here. So this is kind of another broad one. So, you know, there's many scientific, legal, and ethical challenges that we still have to face that are being hotly debated. So one of them is, in the US, should a psychedelic like Ibogaine be accessible only as a medical commodity, meaning a pharmaceutical prescribed by doctors requiring a qualified medical diagnosis like a PTSD or opioid use disorder? Or should it be broadly accessible to the public in different ways, like through licensed non-medical facilities, and even through psychedelic churches, which are cropping up in the hundreds in the US? So where do you come down on this issue? And I'll kind of open it up to maybe Amber, if you have any thoughts there to start off.
I'm of the mindset that, especially because of the cardiac risk, that the medical oversight needs to be taken very seriously.
Mm-hmm. So there is the medical risk aspect of a serious cardiac risk, which for you means it should be treated as a medicine with the proper regulations.
I personally feel that way. The work that we do at Vets is, I wouldn't feel comfortable sending someone to a church to receive this. The liability component would just be too much to bear. Now, I've also been in the position of desperation, and maybe I would have considered doing it in that regard, but probably not, because I think these experiences are incredibly powerful.
Mike, question?
Yeah, I actually...
Go ahead and state your name.
Okay,
yeah.
My name is Kenny Vorspan. I did submit it through that Slido, but I'll state it. So first of all, I want to thank you all. It was very informative. I didn't know anything about yoga when I came, and so thank you for that. But I have to say, and I doubt I'm the only one in here, I hope I'm not, that my question is basically to Bryan, how do you explain how one of the most notoriously right-wing governors in our country, Abbott of Texas, and his buddy Rick Perry, how do you explain how someone like that would be supporting what appears to be a very compassionate and progressive approach to addiction?
I'm going to assume that you are a man of the left.
I'm actually, Bryan, I mean,
it's cool.
Okay,
it's
but
cool.
when, I don't want to really get into a political argument,
yeah.
But when you talk about our country, people feel as though we're losing our humanity,
Yes.
and people don't trust government.
Yes.
There's a reason for that.
Yes.
The other thing is, when you, as a governor, It's not about left wing and right wing. It's about, are you taking care of all of the people in that state? And he clearly is not. So that's why I'm asking this question. What made, do you think, what made him decide, oh, this is a compassionate approach, where I would assume that someone like that would have what you described as, there's a moral deficit here among these people. You know, they're on drugs, they're junkies. You know, I'm not going to worry about them. So how do you explain it?
Well, I think there are, you've asked a very dense question that has some complexity. So I'm going to try to hit what I think are the high notes on that, okay? Mm-hmm. First and foremost, sometimes even leadership that some folks might think is the worst possible is actually responsive to what they hear, broad-based asserted from the grassroots. And what Governor Abbott got to hear and what Lieutenant Governor Patrick got to hear were culturally persuasive messengers who emerged from the ranks of those who they say that they revere the most, returning U.S. warfighters who had to say, the government has completely and totally failed us in every conceivable way. We had to become refugees for the very country that we were prepared to die for in order to save our own lives. If you have any respect, if you have any consideration, if you really believe the things you say about us, we're asking you to do this for us. So take out every other objectionable aspect of these individuals that you would identify. Mm-hmm. That message resonated. And ultimately, in politics, if you are driven by the benevolent, you want the outcome. I personally don't care whether it's the right hand, whether it's a left hand, whether it's a clean hand, or whether it's the dirty hand. If it delivers the result that it is that we need to have, thank you. And we'll move on with it, and we're going to achieve with it what we know it will do, regardless of whether you have full situational awareness of what you have just set a fire to. Sometimes, I'll put it this way, and forgive me because I'm a product of my culture, which is deeply politically conservative, religiously fundamentalist. So I'm going to use a Sunday school analogy that is my personal guiding principle. I will pimp Babylon to build Jerusalem all day long. I just hope I don't enjoy it too much, and that's where you get in danger.
Thank you.
All right, I'm going to go a question on Slido. This is probably directed for Yann, but so Iboga, as you mentioned, is traditionally used in these long-term initiation ceremonies. So does that present issues like risks for the foreseeable future when we're using Ibogaine in largely single-dose sessions without all the other aspects, the long-term treatment aspects that you described? Is there any risks in that?
The bet is yes. Now we're going to see, right? But the bet is yes. You know, I wanted to explain something about the question you asked before, the definition about what is the future of, if the medicine will be used with doctors or into psychedelic churches. I want to explain you something. In Gabon, to have the right to use the medicine to heal people with Iboga, first, you need to be initiated. Second, you need to have a master, to have a discipline, to be disciplined, to have someone up to you who teach you, and to have a community around you. Then you have to go step by step, a different step in the initiatic process. Then you have to bring some people to heal people in front of the master. He has to see the way you treat, he has the way you treat people. Then you have to get married. You have to be engaged in life. Then you have to have kids. They want to see the way you treat your kids, the way you raise your kids. Then you have to have a job. You don't have to depend on initiation financially, on the medicine financially. Also, you have to own a land. You have to be rooted somewhere, not treating people here and there. You have to have a rooted space. This rooted space has to be consecrated. Also, I forget, you need to know your lineage. You need to know where you're coming from. You need to be in peace with your family, with your father, with your mother, with your grandparents, with your great-grandparents. You need to be in peace with that. When all that is gathered, right? Then your master gives you the authorization to heal people. So I don't know if you get the sense of that, you know? So I'm quite curious about who will use the medicine through which route, which school. In Gabon, to reach the level of being a doctor, right? It's around 10 to 20 years. Same as in Europe, to become, in the West, to become a doctor. Imagine an African guy who suffers from a heart issue. And he traveled to the United States, he go to a hospital, he got a surgery, and then he leave the hospital, and then he opened a clinic in Africa, and he become like heart specialist. I mean, we're talking about operating the soul, operating the life, the trauma, operating your lineage. It's quite tricky, right? So the fear is that those understanding of the medicine are lost, and then it becomes something too, that loses the essence of the medicine, yeah.
So one thing I'm taking away too, and this is also from what most of you have said, is, you know, there is a view of the effects of Ibogaine in Iboga that are about symptom reduction, but there's so much more than that that have to do with personal integration, social integration, and things that might extend into the community. And I think you've all kind of mentioned some aspects of kind of the remaking of a person and their relationships. And I think it's a powerful and complicated message. Jonathan, I'm going to point this question to you from the Slido. So what places, if any, in the United States can Iboga or Ibogaine be taken? Some people are limited in overseas travel or face barriers for various reasons. So what can it be taken in the US legally?
No, legally right now, Ibogaine is a Schedule I narcotic. So that means that it supposedly has no medicinal value, and it's as controlled as a drug product can be.
As like heroin.
That's right. Yeah, so there's no legal framework in the United States to be able to take Ibogaine anywhere. So when we're talking about Ambio and the clinic that we operate, we're just south of the US border in Mexico. Ibogaine's in a slightly different position than a lot of other drugs and psychoactive substances in that it was never put onto the UN green list of psychoactive substances. So there's not blanket policy around the whole world like there are for other psychedelics like mushrooms and ayahuasca and things like that. So it's been up to regional governments to be able to decide if it's something they're going to prohibit. The United States did that in the early 1970s. There's other countries in Europe and Israel have done these kind of controls. But what it's left is a lot of areas where it is possible to work with Ibogaine, at least in a gray area. I know there's some effort to try to create a legal framework for Ibogaine in the state of Colorado. Like they're building on the way that they've made licensing available for psilocybin treatment centers. The problem with Ibogaine is that you can't grow Ibogaine in your closet like you can grow mushrooms in your closet. So the issue is they still have to deal with the federal border and federal policies in order to bring it into the state of Colorado. So there's additional complications there. And so unfortunately the answer is it's not available in the United States legally.
Question at the mic.
Hi, my name is Dr. Karina Anderson. I'm a Kentucky girl.
Hallelujah.
I'll try to make it as coherent as possible past my bedtime. I'm licensed to facilitate psilocybin in Colorado. Mr. Dickinson, if you were in the States putting together research, and I don't know if anything's been, what's happening with the Texas study, how similar or different might the study framework be for Ibogaine in terms of 2 therapists, 1 therapist, music, those kind of things. Anything you can say about that? I'd just be super interested. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. So the way that we work with Ibogaine at the clinic is as a quite large team. When the treatment's going on, it's very long and it goes all through the night. So there's, depending on how many people are going through at once, many nurses and doctors available on site doing very short shifts so that they're all very awake when they have to be up and taking care of people. And so this is not a therapy duo. This is a big team. Like we operate sort of like a small hospital. The way that our program is structured and what was observed in the Stanford study was American warfighters who had been through intense combat overseas, who were back at home in the United States in a peaceful setting, who were trying to reintegrate back into that environment. They came to Tijuana for a short time. We have people down for a minimum of 5 days when they're coming to us, and then they're going home. So we have a very small container in which we can try to achieve a treatment effect. And so we're working with single high doses. If you were local to people, there's other ways that you could design care. I think doing exactly what we do in the United States, the exact same way that we do it, would be quite expensive. But there's a lot of ways that you could make that more affordable for people and actually potentially extend the benefit by working with smaller doses over time, microdosing, especially if what you're looking for is primarily a neuroregenerative effect. And so I think that there is a lot of room for research to look at different models when you're able to be sort of closer to the people that you're treating and embedded within the communities. And from Gabon, we know that it is a very communal medicine. From working with the veteran community, we understand how much it is that veterans come and support each other while they're going through, bringing people down and helping them contextualize when they go home. So there's a whole other element of what can be developed in the United States as is integrated into a community.
Thank you, Jonathan. So folks, we are just right at the end. We have so many questions. I thank you for submitting them. I'm sorry we could not get to all of them, but I want to just say that as you can see, there's so much happening. It feels like we're almost at the beginning, even though there's been so much happening already for many years. We are like at this new cusp, legislatively, clinically, in the advocacy space, talking about issues about cultural stewardship and reciprocity. It opens up more questions than it really answers, but I want to appreciate each of you, Bryan, Amber, Jonathan, Yann, for being here tonight, for your sharing about your work, sharing your insights about the revolutionary science of Ibogaine. I wish you success as we move forward with all of this. Everyone, could we give them a hand? So again, I want to thank the Museum of Science team and the Harvard Mahindra Center for their generous support for this evening. And a few quick announcements. We are done with the panel, but we're not fully done with the evening yet. We're going to move to a reception, which is going to be in the back with a cash bar and some light food items where you can mingle, and you can also meet the panelists, maybe run that question by that you didn't get a chance to have answered up here. As you mingle, please do check out some psychedelic pop-up art display, which was generously curated by the Harvard Undergraduate Psychedelics Club, something I wish I had when I was in university. And I wanted to also say one last point is that the UC Berkeley Center for Psychedelic Science, which is a sister program to the Mahindra Center, They are making available findings from a new study that they've done of public attitudes on psychedelics in the US. It's fascinating. If you'd like access to those findings when they come out next month, go ahead and zap this QR code and you can register, or you can find a promo flyer on the promo table, and do check out the promo table. So once again, thank you everyone. Let's give everyone a big hand, one last round of applause. Thank you, be kind to each other, and we'll see you at the reception.